This is a responsive HTML lesson. This is basically the basics of responsive HTML, just to get you guys started, so that the rest you can, all the small little things you want to know, you can Google if you want to, but this is just an overview of responsive HTML in general, because it is a bit different than the traditional HTML you guys are used to. The HTML part of it, actually HTML code, is a lot less. If you do it right, you actually probably cut down your HTML code by, I don't know, 60-70%. But your CSS code becomes a lot more. So you do have a bit of a trade-off. I think at the end of the day, the actual amount of code you write is going to pretty much be the same. It's just your CSS is getting more, your HTML is getting less. So it's the same amount of code. The only difference is going to be that your basically the dynamicness of your code is going to be better. So it is going to be something that you can deploy on any device, view anywhere, any orientation, any screen size. It will render properly, it will look good. Okay, that's the basic idea. So to start off with, the first thing I just want to go into is the units. You guys are used to obviously using stuff like pixel sizes, the PX, or percentages, but with responsive HTML, you can use them. You'll just most probably run into some issues. It will be difficult to get it perfect if you use pixels, or you can even use percentages. It's fine if you use percentages, but the preferred unit that I recommend is vmin. Okay. So there's basically two main units. It's VW and VH. So if this was your screen, then VW is basically it's a theoretical unit that, so it's not actually measured in pixels. It is the width of your screen of the current display. If you are on desktop and you physically resize the window, those units physically change. So basically from 100 would be the width of your screen. So 1 VW is 1/100th of the width of your screen. Okay. So basically a simple way to write it out is it's the width of your screen divided by 100. Okay. So what the browser physically does is it takes the width of the screen, divides by 100, and then calculates a value. Let's say it's 10. That actually means it's 10 pixels. That means 1 VW is 10 pixels. So it doesn't matter where you use, let's say 1 VW, it will actually, in the back end, obviously without you knowing, translate it to pixels and then render it. So that's the width. The other one is exactly the same. It's the height. VH is the height, also divided by 100. So what that also tells you is that VW and VH, you can't say that the height of a blocks is, let's say, 50 VW or VH, and the width is 50 VW. Because then the ratio, what do you call it, the aspect ratio of the block will change depending on your main window size. So it's not, if you actually plan on doing a project, you actually need to do the whole project in one of them. So you pick one. You say, cool, I'm going to do the whole project in VW or VH. And you just stick to that one. Any width you do, or any distance measurement you do in your CSS, whether it's width, height, font size, margins, paddings, borders, anything like that, where you specify a distance or a size or something, you're either going to use VW or you're going to do VH. So yeah, with responsive HTML, obviously now it becomes a bit difficult because your screen is either going to be portrait or it's going to be landscape. Okay, so now it becomes difficult. What do you use? You use VW, which here is going to be your smallest resolution, and here is going to be your biggest resolution. And obviously VH is going to be also the opposite. So it does become a bit of a problem. So they then introduced a new unit called vmin, which is basically whichever one is smallest. So what the browser will do is it will look at the answer here. Well, actually, no, it doesn't even look at the answer. It just looks at width and the height. and whichever one is less, that will be your vmin. Okay, so that makes things a lot easier. So now, it doesn't matter if you are portrait or horizontal, your vmin will always be your shortest one. So in this case, your vmin will be your horizontal axis, and in this one, it will be your vertical axis. You see? So that makes it a lot easier now to develop things. If you, let's say you create a block that's 100 vmin by 100 vmin, it'll always fit perfectly in here, and it will fit perfectly in here. You see? If, let's say, you use 100 VW, then, or the width is 100 VW and the height, then obviously it will fit in the width, but the height will go over. But it will go over at the bottom. Whereas here, if you use VW, the block will sit on top, but it won't go over anywhere. It will just sit right there. You see, so it's not a really good reflection on what to use. So it is up to you to use what you want to use. Most of the time, you want to restrain the width and not really the height. The height of the screen is actually not that important. If you choose, let's say you don't want to use vmin, then rather go with VW. Okay, unless it's a really specific scenario. Because most of the time you don't really want to scroll sideways. Most of the displays and stuff, you want to scroll up and down. So, and if you look at a phone, I mean, people have got this massive thumbs from scrolling down on phones, so people are definitely used to scrolling down. And most websites, if you open a website, you scroll down, you never scroll sideways. So you usually want to know exactly what your width is, and your height can be whatever. So that's why, if you don't want to use vmin and you want to use one of these, I would recommend VW, unless you want to maybe make something that is exactly full screen. Then you can maybe use 100 VW and 100 VH. Okay. This is also not percentage, because obviously it's very similar, because percentage is also 0 to 100. This is according to your main screen. Okay, so if this is your screen, the whole screen, even if you make an element inside an element inside an element and a div like right there in the middle, if you make it 100 VW, it will try to be this wide. Okay. If you make it 100%, it will look at its parent element and try to fit into its parent element. You see, so in that way, VW and VH is a little bit different in percent because it depends on what it uses as reference. VW and VH uses the screen as reference, whereas percentage uses its parent element as reference. Okay, you guys understand these units now? No questions? Okay, cool. So yeah, what I do is I always use vmin because it's just the most dynamic way. It's the easiest one I find. And you're welcome to use any one. Okay, then the next thing is obviously, as you can see, I've drawn two screens here, which is your typical website design, where there's a menu and there's content. The menu, obviously, yeah, most of your websites will look like that, but from landscape orientation to portrait orientation, it changes. We can't leave the menu on the side, otherwise the content's going to be too thin. It's just not going to work well. Especially since you want to scroll down all the time. Yeah, I don't know if you're going to want to stay your menu or leave your menu in place or not, I don't know. But anyway, so how do we make this happen? Where you don't reload the site, you physically turn your phone. So if you turn your phone, if you turn your phone into landscape orientation, you want to see this. If you turn your phone into portrait orientation, you want to see this without reloading the page. Obviously, if you reload the page, you can modify HTML and all sorts of stuff like that. So technically, there's other ways to do it, but if you want to do it on the fly without doing any reloading, that's basically where you're going to have to implement responsive HTML. And this is exactly what responsive HTML is. It responds to your screen's orientation and your screen's size. So we don't actually want to change actual HTML, because then it means you have to code all the HTML twice. Or, I don't know, put sort of weird rules in. So we basically leave the HTML exactly the same. The only thing we change, if we switch from landscape to portrait, is our CSS. So you basically just say how the HTML must be rendered. So our HTML remains static between here and here. The only thing that changes is our CSS. And that's where the browsers introduced a special tag that helps you to do that. And that is this block, this @media tag. So it's quite a long one. This is in your CSS file. So usually what I do is I write CSS for your mobile site first. So you build the whole site first for mobile. Okay? Once you're done and you've built most of your site in mobile, then you can go back and you can say, cool, now let's make it render in desktop. Most of the time people refer to this as desktop and this is mobile. But I mean, you can just say portrait and landscape. It's sort of interchangeable. So I'll just refer to this as mobile from now on, this is desktop. So you sort of develop it for mobile first and then for desktop. So what you would typically do is you write all your CSS out, obviously in your CSS file. Once you're done with this, you leave that CSS there. At the bottom of that CSS, you just add this line. Media only, screen, and orientation, landscape, and additionally you can add a width here. You don't have to add the width. Obviously this is all one line, it's not two lines. But yeah, I've just found scenarios where sometimes what happens is that even if your landscape but the screen is very small, you can't see well. So then you still want to switch back to this view, even if it is landscape, just because everything's rendered a bit bigger. Okay. So yeah, I've always just add 600 pixels is what I found what sort of works the best. You obviously can increase that. There is other units you can add there as well. You don't have to use pixels. You can use, I can't remember what the unit is called. There's another unit. It's sort of something with the screen. Oh, you can use centimeters and stuff like that as well. I don't know how compatible that is. I've never actually used them. But you can actually say min width is a certain amount of centimeters. Because then you have roughly an idea of how big your site will actually be rendered. Okay. And obviously this whole thing must have a bracket, this opening bracket and a closing bracket for this tag. Inside here, you basically rewrite all your CSS. So all the CSS you wrote for this, you just rewrite it with exactly the same names. What actually happens is that even though you are in desktop mode, the browser will read the mobile CSS. Then it will basically evaluate this condition and see, oh, this condition is true. And then it will actually go in and also load this CSS. So it actually loads both if you're in desktop. Obviously, if you're in mobile, it's just going to skip this part. But if you're in desktop, it's still going to load the mobile CSS, and then whatever you put in here is basically the changes you want to make. So you don't actually write all your CSS. You only specify the changes that you want from the original mobile one, which most of the time is just sizes. So you change your sizes a little bit, because obviously the sizes in a screen like this is going to be different than the sizes in the screen like this. So most of the time it's that. There is also other scenarios where you would change certain elements to be visible and others not. So basically, if you can display, if you can hide and show certain elements, this, depending on what view you are on, you can really get creative. So what you can now do is you can say, if we are in mobile, then hide this whole thing here, just remove it, display none. Okay, so you put this whole menu in a div and you just say display none. So if you're in mobile, it literally hides that whole thing. So what you do is you build two menus. You build a menu for here. If you click there, maybe a menu slides in. So you build a menu for that, and you build another menu for this one. All you do is in portrait, or in mobile, you hide this one and you show the other one. And in desktop, you just do the opposite. You see. So you may have to duplicate some HTML, especially if you want to physically change how the layout works. So with CSS, you can enable one HTML and disable other HTMLs. So, but that's usually just more around the template. And most of the time, it's just sort of where your menu and where your content sits. As soon as that's done, you don't really do that much further down the line. You sort of keep to displaying stuff. The only thing you really change is sizes. But there is something that is a problem, especially when it comes to desktop and mobile, and that is tables. How to display a table. Because at most tables, you need a lot of width to display a table. So typically a table will obviously look like this. You have row 1, row 2, cell 1, cell 2. So, but if, let's say you have 20 cells or 20 columns, usually in a desktop environment to display that is fairly easy. You just display all the columns. Most of the time it would fit. But take that now and try and display it on mobile where your screen is only this wide. Now it becomes a problem. Now you need to change the way it's rendered completely. And that's where there's been a sort of an age-old argument between most web developers between table layouts and div layouts. And that's where this comes in. So the old school way of doing things is a table layout. That was before mobile came along. Everybody they will build the entire website in tables. So even the menu, this will be a table with a cell. Inside here, they might create another table. Inside here, they might create another table for each items. So everything used to be built with tables. Then divs came along. Everybody was like, no, divs is the new thing. We build everything in divs now. And there was always a big argument between the two. There was not really a reason why divs was better until progressive HTML came along and this tag was invented. Then the reason became clear why div is better than table. And that's because you can change the way a div responds. You can literally take a div element and turn it into a table element, or turn it back into a div element, or even turn it into a span element. So now suddenly div becomes much more powerful. There is a couple of issues with div, and that's alignment. Alignment with divs is completely broken. The W3C actually needs to invent a new element. They just need to do that because it's a mission dealing with divs, especially when it comes to vertical alignment, horizontal alignment. If you put things in other things, if you use percentages and you have borders and padding and stuff like that, it just breaks. It doesn't work well. You can try and fix it. So there is a way to fix the alignment issues. You just play around with your display property, put it to inline block, put it to block, put it to just inline. Your margins, for instance, if you want to align a div inside another div, but you want to center align it, you can't use the line property, it doesn't work, it breaks. So what you do is you actually set a width for your smaller div, but you set its margins to auto, then it magically center lines it. Okay, but it's actually more of a hack. It's really the way it works. So div is really, really broken when it comes to alignment. It's a big hassle, and sometimes what does work is you just create a table element in the div, you make the table element width 100%, height 100%, and then you use the table to basically fix your alignment. So you actually, in the table's TD element, you would do your alignment, and whatever you put inside there obviously will be aligned properly. If you can center, right align, top align, bottom align, all those kind of things. So it's a bit of a hack, but yeah, it's just very annoying. That's one of the things I hate about divs, is the alignment is completely broken. Okay, so table is fixed. If you write a table like this, it's always going to render like that. So there's obviously a way to write exactly this, but in the div form, using divs. So basically, that works by attaching classes. So you would say class table. Obviously, that means you have to actually create a class called table. So it looks something like that, table. And then you would say display table. It's actually a display type. What this will then do, obviously, it will take this div and basically make it pretend it's a table and render it like a table. It still doesn't fix the alignment issues, but it will basically allow it to, the first dimension of elements inside are the children, that one and that one. It will basically treat them as rows. But only if they also have the display row. So yeah, you'll see the first ones here, I actually say these two, I say class equals row, and yeah, I've actually defined a class row with display table row. So basically this one's got display table, this one's got display table row, and then inside here I've got two smaller divs, and they are obviously, cells, and here I've created cells, so basically all this gets inserted there, and that's display table cell. So what it will do is it will make exactly this thing here render like this. Okay. I did mess up here actually a little bit. So actually this and this needs to be swapped. They're the wrong way around. Okay, so yeah, apologies for that. So basically what needs to happen now is that, this will render the table exactly like this. But what we can now do is, in the mobile side of things, so in here, when we initially load this table, so we're going to build our site first for mobile, we actually declare the HTML like, the CSS like this. So we'll say the table, the row, and the cell will be display block. So that will change the way the div works. So suddenly the divs are not going to be tables, TRs, and rows. It's just going to be normal divs. Because normal divs is display block. That's almost like the default property. And then I just basically overwrote the more properties in the cell by saying font size. I'll get to that now. So like I said, this actually needs to be there, and this needs to be here. So these two are swapped around. So technically for mobile, it must look like this, and for desktop, it must look like this. So if you want to render stuff landscape, then you make it a table. If you want to render stuff portrait, you just make everything divs. What that will do is, instead of rendering like this on desktop, it will render like that on mobile. You see, then suddenly the whole thing changes. Obviously, you need to also keep in mind how your labels will work. Because with the table, your labels usually sit on top, your column names. Whereas with this, where's your column name going to sit? So you might then have to put it inside these TDs and also hide them if you're in this view. Okay, so you're going to have maybe an extra tag called portrait label. And in your desktop view, you just say display none for portrait label. And we'll just remove that label. Okay, cool. So that's basically how we switch. And this will happen instantaneously. You can even on your desktop, you can open a window full screen like this, and or render like this. You can literally take that window and just with your mouse drag it smaller. As soon as it changes to a portrait view, so basically your width is less than your height, it'll automatically instantly switch to the other CSS. And the elements on screen will just quickly change them. Okay, so you can even add transitions, which is pretty cool, but for this purpose it's kind of pointless because people aren't going to switch all the time. But you can actually add transitions so that the table properties is going to transition from one size to another. This may look cool if you rotate it, but like I said, it's kind of pointless. So that's basically it. I just want to quickly see what have I missed. Oh yes, I'm not going to quickly go through this. This is actually standard CSS. There's nothing that was responsive HTML. But you need to know this just to sort of be able to build responsive HTML properly. Responsive CSS. So obviously if you have CSS names, okay, that's these things. There, row, cell, that's those things. If you have a dot in front of it, that basically means that you are declaring a class. The only way HTML element can use this thing is if it actually uses the class equals whatever that name is. That's the only way that HTML element can adopt those styles. Okay, if there's no dot, it's just a name, then we're actually referencing all HTML elements with that tag name. Okay, so I can literally, instead of name, I can just use the word div. And that means any styles are declared in that. So let's say that was just called div with no dot. That means I'm going to make my whole page, every single div in that page is going to be display table suddenly. Okay, so that's a nice way to, I use that usually on inputs. So on input type text, you can specify, cool, all input type text must have these borders, this gradient, the shadows, this font color, all that kind of stuff, this width, this height, so that all text inputs looks the same. Doesn't matter where you use it, because it's something you like very You like to really design it nicely and you spend a lot of effort on stuff like buttons and inputs, other inputs. You really spend a lot of effort on making them look good. So as soon as obviously you just link it to the actual input, that means that if a developer puts an input somewhere, he doesn't have to say class equals. He just writes the input. It'll automatically adopt those classes, okay, or those styles. The last one is the hash and then the name. That refers to an ID. So if you do that, it means that they have to say ID name. Obviously, this one is only if you're really targeting one specific element. So if you want responsive HTML, so to switch between these two, you must use an actual CSS file or a style block. You can't just use where you say, I think I wrote it somewhere. Yeah. Obviously, this is an inline style where you declare your tag and you say style with this. This is not responsive. There's no way to make that responsive. You have to use either one of these and put it in an actual style. Then it's responsive. The reason is you can't really put this whole tag in there. I don't think the W3C spec allows that. So you have to have a style block somewhere, either on top of HTML, just say that bracket style bracket or the normal style tag, or actually include a CSS file and do all your responsiveness in there. Where were we? Oh yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, if you have an ID, obviously you target a specific ID. That's one element. Usually you do this with your template. So you'll have a header, and you'll say the ID header. So obviously what you want to do in time is you want to swap style sheets. So you want the user to be able to switch from, let's say, a green theme to a red theme. So all you do is just swap another style sheet out. So there you obviously are going to have to reload the page because you're going to have to tell the browser to load a different style sheet. But then obviously it gets completely new styles and you can target certain elements. So you can say, cool, the menu item sub must be this. Well, no, menu item sub is actually wrong because that should actually be here. Because it's going to be a class. Let's say header image, which is your main header image, where there's only one of, and you can put that in the template, you can use the hash. Okay. What you can also do in the web face core that we have, you can also use this one, that's what I've done, but you must just remember the I dash 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 I, you have to put around it, otherwise it won't work. Okay, because our IDs are not globally unique. So the parser that parses the HTML also needs to parse this thing. So, but that's in a normal component in WebFace. There we don't actually use style sheet files. We just use the style tag. You say tag, style tag, put your CSS in there, tag, style tag, and then your HTML at the bottom. So you put this in your actual HTML file. Okay, but this is only for the WebFace core. Yeah, then there's a lot of stuff you'll find online. We'll use stuff like position, absolute, relative, fixed, Z-index, float left, float right. Try and stay away from them. There are scenarios where you have to use them when there's no other way. But try and stay away from them. They cause a lot of heartache. If you start using them, you kind of have to continue using them. It's almost like you either have to build your whole site around this or around just like elements pushing each other around, creating space. Because if you use, let's say, position absolute, you have to create space for elements. So you have to like jump a certain amount of space, declare something else, jump a certain amount of space, declare something. But you don't know how far to jump. You have to hard code those limits, and it just gets messy. So try and stay away from these attributes if possible. But like I say, there are places where you actually have to absolutely use these. Otherwise, you just can't use a certain thing. But those are usually very rare. And it's usually mostly your template, your main template that you're going to use those. Not really the content goes inside it. Okay. Yeah, this is the last one. Try to also use CSS where possible. Stay away from normal standard HTML attributes. The reason is they're sort of getting deprecated. People are using them less and less, and also they've got a very low priority. in CSS there's actually a priority tree, because you can specify a width like this. You can say width equals 100, so it's not a style tag, it's just width equals 100. Then you can also specify a width in a style sheet, okay, so in like a class, like this. I can also put a width in here. But then I can also put a width in actual style tag, like this. But if all of them exist, which one is the browser going to use? So there's actually a hierarchy of priorities, where this one is the lowest. It's got the lowest priority. The second priority is this one, in your style sheet. The highest one, that's most priority, is this one. Okay, so lowest priority, medium priority, highest priority. So sometimes what you want to do is you want to override a property, especially if it's very, very, very custom code. You want to override something in the style sheet. Then you can just include in the style tag. Then whatever is declared in the style sheet, just override that property. There is also a way you can actually give these a higher ranking. I can't remember exactly how it's done, but you actually add something at the end here. I think it is something like at priority equals high, or I think it's an exclamation mark and something. Then it basically says that it's always going to be that property. It doesn't matter what the user put in here, the class will actually take preference. So you can do it that way around as well, but that you're not really going to use that much. It's not a thing you use often. So yeah, so try and stay away from normal attributes. Also, normal attributes is not really responsive. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you also can't use, the only thing you can use in normal attributes, I think, is percentage and pixels. It defaults to pixels. So if it's just a number like this, then it is basically, it means it's pixels. Or you can say 100% and it's percent. But those are the only two units you can really use if you're using normal attribute. If you're using style or class sheets, then you can switch between pixels, vmin, vh, vw, percentage. You can even use points and all those other units as well, centimeters, all sorts of other stuff. Okay. Yeah, that's basically everything. Is there any questions? Does it make sense? Let's ask that. Does it make sense? Okay, cool. Is there any other questions?
Would you, in terms of that menu button there, would you then use the absolutes, or how would you?
Yeah, usually what I do with the menu is I use, this is where I actually use the fixed, position fixed. What that does, I think it's fixed, I might be wrong. That's the one where if you specify position fixed, it's always relative to the top left corner of the screen. Okay? Position absolute is always relative to another element that's in your parent path, the first element it finds that has a position attribute set. So that can confuse a lot of people. So basically, if you have a node inside a node, inside a node, inside a node, it's basically going to go up. Look at the parent node, look at its parent node, look at its parent node, until it finds one that also has a position attribute set. Then it's going to be relative to that one, if it is absolute. So only absolute does that. So yeah, there's a very weird way of working, but it does make sense if you actually start using it. Relative is always relative to its current position, where it should have been. So relative is actually a nice one to use. I use relative if I just want to take, if it's rendering now, I just want to move it a couple of pixels to the left or the right or up or down. And you can use relative. Relative I also use if you want to create a container for a child or grandchild absolutely positioned element. So if you want to create a reference system, almost like a canvas. So you create a canvas and you want to put stuff inside it that is absolutely positioned. Then what I would do is the parent, I just say position relative, but I don't specify anything else. I don't specify left, top, bottom, right, or anything. I just say position relative. Just so that it is the anchor point for the absolutes inside it. But obviously in a menu system like this, you always actually want your menu to be on the top left of the screen. And yeah, I think it's even irrelevant for scrolling. I know there's another one. I think it's called something else. It's almost like fixed, but one is with scroll and the other one's without scroll. I think fixed ignores scrolling. So if you have a menu like this, but your content's a lot bigger, so your content makes the page scroll. Fixed will actually will basically scroll with the page almost. So if you scroll down, that thing will remain exactly there. It won't scroll with the page. It's almost like it ignores scrolling. But there is another one as well, I can't remember the name now, where it basically works exactly the same, it just also scrolls. So, but for the menu, I like to use the one that doesn't scroll. It's just more user-friendly that way. Especially with mobile, if you scroll very far down the page, I usually make the top part fixed, as well as when you click the menu. So you don't have to scroll up to click the menu. And if you do click the menu, it doesn't like open high up somewhere, so it looks like it's not working. So at least wherever you are in the scrolling section, it will always slide out in your current view. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's one of the few cases where you sort of have to use these. Like I said, only if you really, really must. Oh yeah, another thing is also, Z-index only works if you have a position set. Okay, you can set Z-index to whatever you want. In that same element, if you don't also have a position set, it basically ignores your Z-index. Okay, there's also something that, yeah, it also gets a little bit complicated. That's why I say just try and stay away from these. Is your Z-index is only in the same scope as grandparent or parent positioned element. It's almost like position absolute, where it goes up in the parent tree until it finds another positioned element. And your Z-index, you only compete with other Z-indexes that shares that same grandparent. Okay. But the problem is your grandparent can also have the Z-index, the one that is positioned. So then, obviously, you are basically in the same Z-index as your grandparent, and then you just fight with your siblings for a Z-index.
Yeah.
But if your grandparent's Z-index is wrong, and there's another element somewhere else that's got a different grandparent, and he's above you, doesn't matter what you set your Z-index to, you'll never be above that guy, because your grandparent is wrong. You see? So that's what I'm saying. This can get really messy. If you start building a site around these things, it can get seriously messy. And then you just, you can't meet deadlines, you take forever to do it, it breaks on certain devices and others not, and it just causes problems. Okay, so try and stay away from those. Okay, cool. Any other questions? Nothing? You sure?
Thinking.
Processing.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think I just have to use it more to.
Okay, so yeah, we are going to be building responsive sites from now on. This is also something you must do if you build a progressive web app. Because obviously progressive web apps is for mobile devices, tablets, desktops. It's the new app platform. So if you want to build progressive web apps, it's almost a must. You must actually invest in responsive design. Otherwise, the web apps is just going to be very flaky. It's not going to look like an app. It's still going to look like a website. If you want to make it look and act like an app, you have to do this. Especially, that's why the vmin and the these are so nice, because it clamps it to the screen. You can force all elements to never go across the screen, across the width or whatever. If you really, really want to, you have to. You can actually force it to clamp down. You can control your scrolling a lot better. And you can also, obviously, with your viewport tag, I don't know if you guys know the viewport tag, you can even stop pinch and zoom. So pinch and zoom doesn't work. So then if you build a progressive web app, you remove pinching and zooming, and your scrolling is perfectly controlled, it looks like a normal app. People won't even be able to tell if it's an actual app or a web app. There's no way of telling. So yeah, that's why this is of utmost importance, just to make your page render properly. Oh yeah, that's one thing I forgot. So what I've found is especially with font sizes, if you have a font size, it's sort of a guideline more. It's not really an exact rule. But if you have font sizes, obviously we declare them in vmin. So let's say we've got a font here called 3vmin, and this is for, okay, this is actually the wrong place. Let me just swap these. So this is, so when we do 1.5, and this is 3. So what I found, which works, it gets you very close to right, is in your mobile site, you use double the amount of vmin as your desktop site for font sizes. Okay, so in here, if a font size is 3 vmin, in here we would make it 1.5 vmin. Okay, vmins it can be very big units, so that's why you almost always gonna go into fractions. So 1.5, 0.2, 0.1. So it's not, with pixels and stuff, you usually don't really use fractions. But with vmin, it's almost, you'll get to a point where you just have to use fractions. So yeah, the vmin here is usually twice the vmin here. Or the vmin here is half the vmin here, whichever you want to look at it. But for font size, I just find that that's sort of a good guideline. It will land you in a good place, and then you can go and see. You can view it on your phone, view it on a tablet, view it on a desktop, and you can say, cool, okay, it looks like this one needs to be slightly bigger, or that one needs to be slightly smaller. But it's just a good landing spot to get it sort of right. I'm not talking about width and height of blocks, I'm just talking about font sizes. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. Awesome. So yeah, basically if you declare this media screen tag or whatever you put in there is basically your desktop or landscape styles you put in there. The reason I get confused is I used to do it the other way around. I used to always build my sites for desktop. So the first styles I did was for desktop. And then I did this, but the opposite. So I used to say orientation portrait, orientation portrait, and I actually didn't have this tag. And then all the styles I had in here was mobile styles. That's how I used to do it. That's why I got swapped these two around by accident. So, yeah. But as I developed sites, I found it's actually much better to develop this one first. Okay. Because it's easy to take something that is here and convert it to a desktop site. Because this is very restrictive. You don't have the freedom to put almost anything anywhere. You don't have a lot of space. So it's very restrictive. So it's easier to build your whole site restrictive first of all, get everything in where it should be, and then deploy it here, because there's much more space, much more freedom and stuff like that. So it's easy to get it from here to here. So that's why it's better to build it here first. Otherwise, you have to try and fit all this in here. Your mobile site is just not going to look that well. It's not going to function properly. And I can actually see that there's a lot of sites on the internet that I visit that I can see that they did it the wrong way around. They developed this first and then that. Usually, if you use the site on the desktop, it works brilliantly. All the search boxes work and everything slides in and out. And you switch to mobile view, then everything like overlaps and you can't see stuff and stuff is hidden and it just doesn't work well. Then you know that they actually built the site here first and then there. Okay, cool. Okay, it doesn't mean that just because we're sort of switching to div layout, it doesn't mean that we must sort of never use tables again. There are still certain scenarios where you do want to have rows and columns, especially if you don't have a lot of columns, maybe like 3 or 4 max. Then sometimes it's easier to use tables because tables will always try to stick to that structure. So it doesn't mean that you always use divs. Because obviously if you want to display something as a table, but you want to make a display an actual table like this here and here, you can't really use this because it will switch it. So then the easiest is just to use a table. Okay, so it's not to say that tables are bad and don't use tables. It's just that if you want to, for that table to be responsive, use divs. Okay, cool. So yeah, there is still scenarios where a table is a good idea, especially when it comes to borders and stuff like that. Sometimes I found with divs that, I don't know, they don't really react the way you want them to if they're in a table. I can't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, there is some issues with divs you can't do. I think it might have been table cell spacing. I think cell spacing doesn't work with divs, it only works with tables. So yeah, stuff like that. Okay, cool, awesome.
Does the vertical, well, not the vmin and stuff, does that work with tables?
Yes, yeah. Look, a table can still use all the classes that a div can use.
Yes, okay, cool.
But I don't think you can. I don't think you can take a TR and make it display block.
Yeah.
I've never done that. I don't know what happens if you do that. I don't think the browsers will allow that. So yeah, or it might work in some browsers, but other browsers not. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's also you need to test in multiple browsers. Whenever you do responsive HTML, you need to test in Firefox, Chrome, and Safari, and yeah, Edge. Unfortunately, there's still people that use Edge or Internet Explorer, so we still have to like test in those. Okay, so those are the 4 main ones you have to test in. Obviously, you have to test that in mobile as well as desktop. So technically, you have to do 8 tests. Okay, so yeah, you have to do that, because not to say that if it works in one browser, it will work in another. Because these browsers do have completely different code to make these things work. So sometimes it does happen when one browser does one thing and another browser does another thing. There's also a tag I always add. I think it's called box sizing. Okay, I'm not going to write it down because I'm not sure exactly what it is. I think it's box sizing. So what I usually do is I actually, because you can use wildcard in here. You can actually use a wildcard. You can add a wildcard that I can actually write down. Or you can say asterisk. Okay, and then it's all elements. I use the word element and tag interchangeably, so yeah, don't get confused. So if you use the word asterisk, it basically puts a style on every single element. What I also like to do is in my I like to set defaults that way. So I would say, let's say, and also what I like to do is set that as inherited, because you can override a property in CSS by saying, don't use this property, use the property of your parent. That's a very powerful mechanism. So what I like to do is I like to actually add a CSS name just called HTML, because that's your topmost tag. So I just say HTML, body, just for your topmost tag and your body. And then there I specify my default styles. So I would set padding to 0, I would set margin to 0, I would set borders to 0. I would set my default font size, my default font family, what font I want to use, if it's bold, if it's underlined, whatever. I set that there, default colors, so font colors, background colors, all that stuff. So I set it in my HTML and my body element, okay? But then I also declare an asterisk one. And in the asterisk, so it's going to be a block exactly like this, but the only thing there is going to be asterisk. And in there, I would say font size, inherited. Background color, inherited. Padding, inherited. Margin, inherited. Font family, inherited. Basically what that means is every single HTML element in your page inherits its parent's properties. So the font size, the background colors, the borders, all that stuff. It just makes it easier if you suddenly switch styles. Because you might have, in the content, you might have different blocks, and suddenly here you want to switch to the smallest font. But in that block, there's other blocks as well. They will automatically also have the smaller font. You see, because it's inherited. But you still have a default font, which is declared in your topmost element, which you declare in your body in your HTML. So that's also a nice thing to use, to just make sure that across the board you've got the same stuff. And then another one I would also like to put in the asterisk tag is box sizing. I think it's called content something, box dash sizing colon content sizing or something like that. That's something, especially between Firefox and Chrome. Sometimes you're getting rendering differences between them. You're getting red gaps in the one and not in the other. Which usually means your box sizing is not set. The other thing is that right on top, your doc type needs to be set. This is very, especially with IE, you need to set your doc type. And then there's also another one in the top. I'll drop it in the description of the video. I can't remember what it is now. But it's another tag you also have to drop in. That makes IE and Internet Explorer render the same. Because there's sometimes some rendering differences between them. So there's a lot of hacks that you'll learn over time, but these, most of them you have to Google. And don't just use the first example thrown at you. Go through a couple of sites, see what they all say. see what works the best. Sometimes there's a lot of answers, a lot of ways to fix it, but a lot of them is like you have to change the way your site works, which is not always the best solution. And sometimes there's a small thing you have to insert somewhere and it just tells this browser to render it like that or that. There's also a strict way of rendering things. There's HTML strict that you can enable. I think it's also tagged on top in your head of your HTML page. You can enable strict mode.
Other position.
No. Oh, static. Yes, static. Yeah, that's the other one. Let's add it, static. Yes, I think static ignores scroll and fixed follows scroll. I think, I'm not sure. That's the other one, static. So yeah, you do have the strict modes that you can add as well. So sometimes when you write a whole page and you find that one browser just does something completely different, you're going to have to do some research on Google and to see. You probably just need to add one line or two somewhere, and then something will just magically work. It just basically tells that browser to follow these rules and not that rules. Okay. Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I think that's everything.